The maps, widely circulated in political circles and echoed throughout media outlets, present a deceptively clear dichotomy: a European continent neatly divided between affluent nations and those mired in poverty. This visualization relies almost exclusively on gross domestic product, a metric that merely tracks the velocity of money moving through an economy within a specific time frame. It deliberately ignores the critical distinction between generating high income and successfully building, let alone protecting, actual wealth over generations. GDP accounts for spending, including the accumulation of debt, but it is silent on the resilience of a household's balance sheet. To understand who truly possesses hard assets and who is merely renting a middle-class lifestyle from financial institutions, we must look past the glossy surface of GDP and examine the true median net worth. This forensic approach takes the individual precisely in the middle of society, aggregates their total cash and property, and subtracts all private debts. The resulting figure reveals where financial fortresses have been constructed, and where the entire structure is merely a house of cards, highly vulnerable to the slightest economic tremor. $100,000 in unencumbered assets provides security. The same amount sitting against a massive mortgage represents a precarious exposure to systemic risk. This discrepancy between appearance and reality is where the danger lies, as several ostensibly wealthy nations are found to be buried under unsustainable mountains of private leverage. Our analysis begins at the lower end of this spectrum, where structural factors and economic shocks have systematically suppressed the accumulation of household capital. At position number 45 is Turkey, a transcontinental state with just 3% of its landmass in Europe. The economic reality on the ground serves as a stark case study in rapid value destruction. Over the last 2 decades, food prices have exploded by an unprecedented 3,837%. While a tiny economic elite concentrated in Istanbul acquires mansions as a hedge against catastrophic hyperinflation, the middle class has been effectively annihilated. This hollowing out has driven the highest wealth inequality on the European continent. The net result of this multifaceted disaster is a median net worth crushed to just $5,488. By benchmarking in US dollars rather than local currency or euros, we strictly adhere to the UBS standard, which coldly exposes how much real purchasing power evaporates when fiat money is subjected to such extreme inflationary pressure. Following closely at number 44 is Russia. Though a transcontinental behemoth, with only 23% of its territory in Europe, it nevertheless holds the largest European landmass of any single nation. When transcontinental countries are included in the data, Russia exhibits the second worst wealth inequality in Europe, marked by a devastating Gini index of 86.9. The entity that claims the top spot for inequality will likely come as a surprise later in this ranking. While a minuscule circle of politically connected oligarchs exerts control over vast global resources, the average Russian citizen has been left entirely behind the curve of prosperity. Despite inheriting high rates of homeownership from the Soviet era, the median net worth for households languishes at a minimal $8,595. To counteract years of stagnant wages, ordinary families have been increasingly forced to rely on heavy borrowing simply to cover basic everyday living expenses. This dependency has pushed national consumer debt past a significant $470 billion. Number 43 is Azerbaijan, a transcontinental petrostate situated at the precise geographical crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. The economic indicators reveal a brutal story of resource dependency. Hydrocarbons account for approximately 45% of GDP and an overwhelming 90% of all exports. The sovereign wealth fund has amassed over $50 billion from oil revenues, yet these riches fail to trickle down. Ordinary citizens see almost no benefit from this resource wealth. While homeownership rates exceed 80%, the underlying values of these assets remain dangerously depressed, leaving the median net worth stranded at only $9,209. This structure holds the entire population permanently hostage to external global commodity prices, a factor completely outside their borders. Next, at number 42, is Georgia, another transcontinental nation with just 5% of its land technically within Europe. The official narrative from Tbilisi has long boasted about tripling the nation's GDP over the last decade. However, this glossy surface hides a deep-seated reality. While a growing tech elite and influxes of Russian expats fleeing conflict have artificially inflated the headline economic figures, More than 50% of the local workforce remains trapped in low-yield subsistence agriculture. This highly touted economic miracle completely bypassed the countryside, reinforcing a severe and stagnant urban-rural divide. Because this new money is hoarded exclusively at the top of the economic pyramid, the median net worth for an ordinary Georgian citizen remains a low $9,451. Number 41 brings us to Moldova. If transcontinental nations are removed from the map, Moldova officially occupies the absolute bottom position in Europe for median wealth. Squeezed between Romania and war-torn Ukraine, the country represents a textbook example of an economy bled dry by departure. Fully 1 in 3 citizens currently lives below the national poverty line, triggering a catastrophic demographic collapse as the prime working-age population mass migrates toward the European Union in search of opportunity. Furthermore, chronic institutional corruption and a massive black market, estimated to swallow 25% of all economic output, leave the state perpetually underfunded. This dynamic cripples essential infrastructure and healthcare systems. The resulting median net worth is just $10,131. With no robust local industry and a perilous reliance on expensive foreign loans for energy, Moldovan families are trapped in a perpetual loop of basic survival. At number 40 is Armenia, another transcontinental nation included in this analysis. Due to its profound historical, political, and cultural ties to Europe, Armenia is a country fundamentally trapped by geography, landlocked, regionally isolated, and burdened for decades by persistent conflict. It has never possessed the underlying conditions necessary to build broad-based household wealth. A significant portion of its economic stability has long relied on remittances sent home by the large Armenian diaspora abroad, rather than a powerful, self-sustaining domestic market. This dynamic ensures that, despite intermittent periods of GDP growth, the economy remains structurally fragile. The median net worth stands at just $14,215, providing a stark reminder that sheer resilience in the face of adversity is not the same thing as tangible prosperity. Number 39 is Serbia. More than 2 decades after devastating regional wars systematically shattered its industrial base, the country is still involved in the laborious process of rebuilding from the ground up. Foreign direct investment has seen a notable surge, reaching over $4.5 billion in 2023, and GDP growth consistently outpaces the EU average. Yet, the structural damage inflicted in previous decades runs deep. An entire generation witnessed key factories close, triggering a relentless and ongoing brain drain that strips the nation of its most productive and highly educated citizens every single year. Wages remain among the lowest on the continent, and the private banking sector is still relatively underdeveloped. The predictable result is a median net worth of $16,462, a nation possessing genuine momentum, but one that continues to carry the full weight of its broken economic past. At position number 38 is Bosnia and Herzegovina. 30 years after the Dayton Agreement ostensibly ended one of Europe's bloodiest post-war conflicts, this country continues to pay a heavy price, visible on its national balance sheet. The political structure deliberately split the nation into 2 separate entities and 3 rotating presidential seats, creating a unique form of governance paralysis that actively costs the economy billions annually in sheer bureaucratic waste. Youth unemployment consistently exceeds 35%, ranking it among the highest rates in Europe and fueling a devastating brain drain. Meanwhile, over 18% of the total population still subsists below the poverty line. These deep-seated structural chains drag the median net worth down to just $16,484, revealing a nation otherwise rich in natural resources and human potential that is being systematically strangled by its own Byzantine political architecture. Finally, at number 37 is Albania. On paper, the macro statistics suggest an economy in the midst of a boom. GDP growth has averaged over 3% annually for the last decade, and the Albanian Riviera is now promoted as one of Europe's fastest-growing tourist destinations. But as we continue to scratch the surface of these glossy GDP figures across the continent, a far more brutal paradox consistently emerges. Our investigation will now move to examine how these rapid transformations are impacting the stability of the middle class in regions previously considered on the path to convergence. While the initial rankings illustrate how fragile macro-statistical growth can be when detached from genuine capital accumulation, the underlying data only tells part of the story. To truly comprehend why these social and economic reversals remain hidden behind political declarations of success, we must examine the specific regional, industrial, and generational dynamics operating beneath the surface. When we scrutinize the mechanics of how household asset values are formed, the gap between official gross indicators and actual lived experience becomes vast. Across Eastern Central Europe, a pattern emerges where high rates of real estate ownership, often celebrated as a sign of financial independence, do nothing to elevate the middle class. Because the assets themselves exist in a state of economic isolation, consider the situation at position number 36, Belarus. While its neighbors aggressively privatized state-owned assets after the collapse of the Soviet model, Belarus took a highly divergent path, retaining state control over roughly 70% of industrial output. On paper, this centralized approach has kept wealth inequality exceptionally low, yielding a Gini coefficient of just 67.1. Walk through the industrial corridors of Minsk or Mogilev, and what stands out is the absence of conspicuous destitution, but also the total absence of private commercial vitality. The streets lack the vibrant storefronts, independent service hubs, and local investment offices that characterize dynamic economies. Equality here has been achieved by keeping the entire pie small, leaving the median net worth frozen at a modest $18,466. The state provides basic economic security, but it does so by precluding the very possibility of personal capital accumulation. A starkly different paradox governs position number 35, Poland. For 3 decades, Poland has been lauded as the undisputed economic tiger of Central Europe, even managing to entirely avoid contraction during the 2008 global financial crisis. Warsaw's modern skyline, dense with gleaming glass towers, rivals that of Frankfurt or London. Yet the forensic reality of the median net worth sits at a surprisingly low $20,263. Why is there such a massive disconnect between the nation's hypermodern infrastructure and the financial reality of its average citizen? The explanation is entirely systemic. While contemporary salaries have risen dramatically, generational capital requires decades of undisturbed stability to accumulate. Polish citizens are working in advanced industries and possess high nominal homeownership rates, but the national balance sheet effectively started from absolute zero in 1989. The wealth visible in the financial centers is largely institutional or foreign. The domestic middle class is forced to build its individual fortresses entirely from scratch, meaning this current figure represents a launching pad rather than a permanent ceiling. This structural illusion becomes even more pronounced when analyzing number 34, Romania. This nation holds a remarkable European record. Over 95% of its citizens legally own the home they inhabit, a rate that dwarfs the ownership structures of advanced Western economies like Germany or France. One would logically assume this massive block of real estate equity would propel the median household net worth into the upper tiers of the continent, yet it remains anchored at a meager $21,545. The cause is a profound internal valuation gap. Millions of these fully paid-off homes are located within hollowed-out rural districts or consist of crumbling communist-era concrete apartment blocks in secondary industrial towns. In these areas, the property markets are effectively dead. There are no buyers, no capital inflows, and consequently no market liquidity. The residents are rich in bricks, but entirely poor in cash, holding illiquid equity in structures that the modern economy refuses to value. In sharp contrast stands number 33, Bulgaria, which presents perhaps the most fascinating structural anomaly inside the European Union. Despite recording the lowest official wages and lowest GDP per capita in the entire bloc, its median net worth inexplicably outpaces its wealthier neighbors, reaching $22,759. The hidden mechanism here is a widespread cultural avoidance of private debt. The average Bulgarian citizen systematically refuses to leverage their lifestyle through consumer loans or complex financial products. When combined with an 85% homeownership rate, predominantly comprised of multi-generational family properties passed down entirely free of debt, the household balance sheet remains remarkably insulated. Step into a provincial Bulgarian town, and you will see signs of suppressed municipal budgets and low nominal incomes, yet the local population is completely unburdened by the monthly financial extractions that drain Western households. The complete absence of massive mortgages and credit card debt functions as a silent, impenetrable shield protecting them from global market shocks. Moving to number 32, the Czech Republic reveals the opposite side of the debt equation. Renowned as the heavy industrial powerhouse of Central Europe, Prague boasts an unemployment rate so suppressed that manufacturing firms are constantly forced to import external labor. Yet this high-wage industrial miracle hides a fragile core. The median net worth stands at a modest $23,502. Here, the middle class is being systematically squeezed by a toxic combination of skyrocketing real estate prices and heavy reliance on credit. While Czech workers generate massive GDP and export values for international automotive and engineering corporations, the capital is hoarded by those entities. To live near the urban economic centers, local families must take on immense mortgage debt, effectively transferring their high wages directly back to the banking sector. They are highly productive, yet structurally blocked from accumulating unencumbered personal wealth. A similar pattern of hyper-concentration manifests at number 31, Kazakhstan. This vast Eurasian state, whose westernmost territory anchors it structurally within the European geographic dataset, has used its colossal oil and mineral exports to fund glittering capital projects in its major urban centers. However, this petrodollar boom has created an extreme spatial divide. In the high-rise districts of the major cities, wealth is highly visible, but step into the vast, silent expanses of the agricultural steppes, and the modern economy completely vanishes. The infrastructure is aged, and the local populations remain entirely disconnected from the resource wealth hoarded in the capital. This profound geographical bifurcation keeps the national median net worth restricted to $25,225. This phenomenon of foreign-driven growth failing to enrich the domestic population is also visible at number 30, Hungary. By establishing the lowest corporate tax rate in the European Union at just 9%, Budapest successfully induced massive German premium automakers and Asian battery conglomerates to construct advanced production facilities within its borders. Yet this intense industrialization has failed to translate into robust household balance sheets, with the median net worth trapped at $26,416. Burdened by severe inflationary spikes and a structurally weakened local currency, Hungarian workers find themselves caught in a classic middle-income trap. They are operating world-class machinery daily, but receiving wages that prevent the conversion of labor into long-term, debt-free generational capital. This regional investigation demonstrates that across the continent, the mechanisms used to project economic health frequently mask an entirely different reality on the ground, where the middle class is either asset-rich but cash-starved, or highly paid but entirely hollowed out by systemic debt. Why this divide widens so dramatically as we approach the financial heart of the West is a question official narratives refuse to address. Yet the most surprising layer of this structural reversal is still hidden within the balance sheets of Europe's most celebrated economic powerhouses. Behind these complex macroeconomic statistics, real lives being profoundly reshaped across the European landscape. As ordinary families discover that the rules of capital accumulation have been fundamentally rewritten, the structural transformations occurring within national balance sheets manifest daily as quiet, desperate compromises inside individual homes. In the Baltic region, position number 29, Lithuania illustrates the human cost of a rapid, uneven economic transition. In the cafes and digital hubs of Vilnius, young professionals earn gross salaries that closely rival Italian averages. Yet the residential neighborhoods tell a story of exclusion. Older citizens and service workers watch local supermarket shelves fill with premium imported goods they cannot afford, as surging modern inflation outpaces their ability to secure tangible assets. The national median net worth of $32,385 reflects a society where the financial elevator has ascended rapidly for a select tech elite, leaving the broader population to scramble for basic stability in an increasingly high-cost environment. A similar sense of spatial and economic displacement haunts the coastlines of number 28, Croatia. Walk through the historic stone alleys of the Dalmatian coast during the winter months, and the silence is deafening. Shuts are drawn, restaurants are dark, and handwritten signs offer properties for sale to foreign investors. The massive tourism boom, which generates nearly a quarter of the nation's GDP, has transformed real estate into an international commodity, decoupling housing prices from local wages. Young Croatian families are systematically priced out of their own hometowns, forced to choose between taking on lifelong debt or migrating northward. Despite decent nominal homeownership figures, passed down from previous generations, the extreme cost of living, and a highly seasonal low-wage job market keep the true median net worth anchored at $34,837, rendering the population structurally vulnerable beneath a beautiful tourist facade. Further north at number 27, Estonia's celebrated paperless society reveals its own unique domestic strains. While over 99% of public services run seamlessly online and tech startups multiply in Tallinn, the absence of a deep, resilient domestic market leaves the local population acutely exposed to global economic shocks. The sleek, minimalist aesthetic of the capital masks a precarious reality for workers in traditional manufacturing and export sectors where shifting global demand can instantly erase a family's financial footing. Building a stable financial foundation from a median net worth of $39,586 remains an uphill battle when the surrounding economy is so tightly bound to volatile international capital flows. Even in societies engineered for absolute equality, the structural boundaries of wealth accumulation remain rigid. Position number 26. Slovakia stands as the most egalitarian nation on the continent, boasting a wealth Gini index of just 50.8. In the industrial towns surrounding Bratislava, nearly every family owns their home debt-free, a protective shield inherited from post-Soviet privatization that successfully insulates them from rent inflation. Yet, because the economy has been transformed into a hyper-specialized, per-capita car production engine for multinational brands, the workers remain tied to assembly line wages. The financial gap between the rich and the middle class is small, but the entire population shares a very standardized, strictly limited pie, capping the median net worth at $40,703 and binding personal financial growth directly to the shifting fortunes of the global automotive industry. This barrier to individual progress becomes an overt crisis in the Mediterranean tax havens. At number 25, Cyprus presents an economy built almost entirely for international billionaires and offshore entities. Stroll along the Limassol Marina, and the landscape is dominated by luxury glass towers and high-end vehicles. Yet the average Cypriot citizen is entirely excluded from this parallel financial universe. Facing massive housing inflation driven by foreign capital inflows and stagnant local wages, the younger generation finds the accumulation of unencumbered assets nearly impossible, leaving the true median net worth stranded at $40,957. This illusion of prosperity is mirrored at number 24, Montenegro, where a foreign-driven real estate gold rush along the Adriatic coast has artificially inflated the paper wealth of families who happen to own land before the boom. On paper, the median net worth sits at a surprising $43,438, but this capital is completely illiquid. For the younger generation earning Balkan wages under €800 a month, the reality consists of facing Western European housing prices without any hope of inheritance, effectively trapping them in a cycle of perpetual rental dependency. At number 23, Latvia further reinforces this illusionary wealth dynamic. While post-Soviet property privatization has granted many families nominal ownership of their apartments, resulting in a median net worth of $46,899, this capital remains securely locked inside the physical structure of aging concrete blocks. It cannot be converted into savings, healthcare security, or educational investment. For younger Latvians trying to build a life from scratch without inherited real estate, the financial landscape is exceptionally hostile, driving a quiet but relentless wave of outward migration. This generational divide reaches an absolute breaking point in position number 22, Greece. Despite surviving a decade of brutal austerity and systemic crises, Greek households maintain a median net worth of $53,501, primarily because real estate constitutes roughly 60% of total household wealth. But this concrete shield hides a paralyzed social elevator. Step into the residential districts of Athens, and the reality is defined by adult children trapped in their childhood bedrooms. Fully 45% of workers under the age of 30 still live with their parents, and over 60% remain financially dependent on older relatives, whose paid-off properties represent the family's final line of defense against poverty. The most profound systemic revelation occurs as the analysis moves into Europe's industrial core. Position number 21. Germany shocks mainstream observers with a median net worth of just $66,735, far below many of its less productive neighbors. This forensic discrepancy exposes the core mechanics of the modern economic engine. Germany is a hyper-productive, export-driven powerhouse with high average salaries, yet its citizens do not own the wealth they create. The German system relies on a low homeownership model, where the middle class predominantly rents their homes and relies on state welfare structures rather than private asset accumulation. This ranking strips away the illusion of GDP, revealing that high national productivity does not automatically translate into capitalized households. The identical structural logic applies to number 20, Austria, where a modest median net worth of $68,492 reflects a deliberate institutional choice. In Vienna, a vast, highly efficient system of municipal and social housing ensures a high quality of life, but it simultaneously discourages middle-class families from building private generational wealth through property ownership. On paper, the private household balance sheet appears undercapitalized, demonstrating that a wealthy state can comfortably coexist with an asset-poor population. At number 19, Portugal's median net worth of $70,409 looks robust on paper, but it is another case of capital sedimentation. The wealth belongs entirely to the past, locked-in properties acquired decades ago, or passed down through agrarian families. Younger Portuguese adults face a brutal contemporary reality: low local salaries colliding with an internationalized real estate market driven by foreign buyers and digital nomads, leaving them financially stranded despite the respectable median figures of their elders. Conversely, number 18, Slovenia demonstrates a much more stable and evenly distributed household structure. With a median net worth of $75,600, this small Central European nation has avoided the flashy extremes of foreign investment booms and predatory financialization. Instead, its wealth has been accumulated gradually and broadly across the population through widespread homeownership and low levels of private debt, showcasing a rare example of quiet household resilience. This stability stands in stark, systemic contrast to position number 17, Sweden, which perfectly exposes the severe wealth inequality hidden within the advanced Nordic model. While Sweden boasts exceptional living standards and high salaries, its accumulated capital is intensely concentrated at the absolute top of the social pyramid, resulting in an astronomical wealth Gini coefficient of 87.4, the highest on the continent. Walk through the suburbs of Stockholm, and you are observing a population that carries some of the highest mortgage debt burdens in the world. Ordinary citizens do not possess significant private capital. Instead, they have entirely outsourced their long-term financial security to a powerful welfare state, renting a premium lifestyle through lifelong financial leverage. Ultimately, this pan-European forensic analysis brings us back to a sobering fundamental truth that mainstream economic reporting deliberately obscures. GDP and national export data are merely measurements of economic velocity. They track the rate at which wealth is extracted, spent, and circulated. True median net worth reveals who actually holds the keys to the kingdom and who is merely permitted to occupy a space within it so long as their credit remains good. From the hollowed-out villages of the East, where wealth is rich in illiquid brick but starved of opportunity, to the highly leveraged suburbs of the West, where affluent lifestyles are rented from institutional lenders, a modern citizen is increasingly separated from the ownership of hard assets. The grand map of European prosperity is not a story of convergent wealth, but a complex tapestry of structural traps, where the individual in the middle of society is gradually discovering that true financial autonomy has been quietly engineered out of existence.